When I contacted you about it, like you said there was a connection between mental health and horror. What do you see that as?
So horror it's basically um when you watch it and you're in a controlled environment and you're experiencing things like anger, fear, violence. It's, as I said, it's a controlled area for you to explore these feelings.
Mm,
And so you're not exploring them in real life because you have this outlet for you to, if you're really angry, if you're really pissed off, put on a slasher and watch a load of people get murdered. Like, I know that sounds really grim, but it works.
mm.
And because of the fear, you get a rush of endorphins. So there's actually some scientific kind of fact behind it as well. And a lot of the time, especially growing up in kind of really rural Mayo, I was pretty much a black sheep. I was the only one into goth stuff and heavy metal. Everyone thought I was a Satan worshiper. And in horror, I found other outsiders. So
Mm.
I really related to monsters. And so it was just that, the same way you'd get from music, you
Mm.
relate to it.
I think we had someone on talking about this, and it wasn't the last time we did a Halloween special, but it was to do with someone who was really into horror films as their way out of like life in general, and the way of finding a way to kind of think. I think it was to do with anxiety in particular, and I find it very helpful for my anxiety in the sense that it, like you said, it's not, when you're watching a horror film, it's not like the anxieties of everyday life. It's anxieties that are overblown and, like, at
Yeah.
times silly but enjoyable kind of anxieties, and there is an escapism to them, and I will always highlight that. And, like, you can get it from other films as well, but I do think that the horror, because, like you said, there is an anxiety within them anyway. I do think it would works better in that way. And, like, I know a lot of people aren't into horror; they're too afraid to. My housemate, she won't go near horror films, and I understand totally. But I would recommend them for that. While we're talking about that, actually, I was looking into mental health in films, and
Mm-hmm.
all genres of films, not just horror films, but the Babadook was one that kind of really stood out for me as a really for what, like, you talked about motherhood, so I guess
Yeah.
that's what I'm kind of going off, and having a child, and for that child to be, whether that child is difficult because it's a child or whether it's
Mhm.
difficult because it's the mother's problems that they're having. You've obviously seen that film. I can see you shaking your head. Did
Yeah.
you like it?
I actually wrote a whole piece about it
Okay.
for Moving Pictures Film Club about the Babadook and postnatal depression.
Hmm.
So for me, that film is one of my mental health films.
Hmm.
The first time I watched it was before I had a child, and I was very much like, meh, kid's annoying. It's a good ghost story, I guess.
Yeah.
And then I went through my postnatal depression really, really bad. And I watched The Babadook again, and I spent the whole time just crying my eyes out because I know a lot of people think the Babadook kind of represents grief,
Hmm.
but for me, the Babadook represented kind of depression, and the fact that, she spent so long struggling to kind of hide it and to, cover things up and
Hmm.
say everything's okay. And then eventually it just took over her and she had to kind of learn to live with it. And that was such a metaphor for
Hmm.
me, dealing with depression and anxiety, and the fact that, at the end of it, you just have to accept it and you just have to learn to live with it. And as well, like the kid, even though, his behavior is more amplified or he does represent a neurodivergent kid, all kids are like that. Like
Hmm.
there's been days when my kid just does not stop screaming at me and I'm just like, why can't you be normal? Which is like one of the lines from the film.
Yeah.
So it's so relatable.
There's a scene. The final scene in the film is probably the most powerful scene in it, because, like you say, it's the idea of, yeah, she's learning to live with it, and
Mhm.
and that's the way it is. And when it, like, I don't look, it didn't connect, it didn't click with me fully on first view and what exactly it was about, and until I kind of read up about it and watched, obviously went back to it and watched the second time, and then saw it through that kind of lens of whether it was postnatal depression or depression in general, because it could be seen as both depending on who's watching it. I could see what it meant then, like, and sometimes it takes that, like, someone else's view of a film to kind of go back in and look at something and kind of go, well, like, that's the bit that I missed. It's just
Yeah.
a tiny bit. So I just wanted to talk about it because I do think it's an absolutely brilliant film that everybody should watch. But for more reasons than just being entertainment. There's a lot to it, you know. It's
Yeah.
really brilliant.